We talk a lot about Do Men, Death of a Salesman, Willy Loman. There's nothing more death of a salesman right now in football than Erik ten Hag. Even sadder sight, watching him in that damp beige spring linen suit, just looking on helplessly. And you saw in that moment the dank dark reality of a very physically, emotionally shattered bloke. This is the Men in Blazers video podcast presented by the GFOPs at Camarena, the most awarded tequila. We back. Trophyless like Harry Kane. By the way, an aside, him moving to Bayern Munich and then Bayern Munich having their first barren season in 12 long years. It's quite an achievement in its own right, but we're not here to talk about that. We are going to revel in a Premier League season, which is huge relief going down to its final weekend. Kind of. Manchester City obliterating all comers. Then Arsenal outlasting a quite self-destructive, leaky roof Manchester United amidst biblical scenes of thunder and lightning. Chelsea surging quietly under the radar. Burley ball, it's the future. We also are almost 100% sure of the teams that are going to be leaving us. Oh, relegation comes for us all. But I'm not here alone. To break it all down, after a weekend in which we celebrated all mothers, thank you, Val. It's the Bard of Harrogate, the Thomas Friedman of football from your New York Times chief soccer correspondent. It's my friend, it's Mr. Rory Smith.
We did Mother's Day ages ago.
I know, I'm always confused, Raw. English Mother's Day is like off with American Mother's Day, and so I kind of blew it twice with my own mother, which is why up top I said, Val, I love you. I'm incredibly grateful. England falling apart generally as a flailing form of power. But the one thing they are ahead of the world in, Raw, they do Mother's Day first every year.
Exactly, and I think that is the last vestige of empire. It really is.
By the way, if it is, it's one of the only great things. God bless you, all mothers. But I need to quickly up top, talking about England, delve into a story that I think everyone in world football is currently talking about. Yeah, there's a headline in the New York Times even. Raw, an English town drops apostrophes from street signs, ... Some aren't happy. It's an article, essentially, let me break it down if you didn't see it, dear listeners, about your town, Raw, Harrogate, which it calls a Victorian spa town in northern England. Essentially, it boils down to street signs like, say, St. Mary's Walk, Mary's, apostrophe S, have now lost the apostrophe on those street signs because, and I wag my finger as I say this, North Yorkshire Council, grrr, has decided to, quote, phase out apostrophes from street signs to help with GPSs and database searches. Obviously, outrage has ensued. Shortly after the first new sign was erected, someone drew an apostrophe right on it, and it's led to essentially an etymological battle at the local council, where it's been uncovered that the apostrophe is a relatively modern invention. Didn't know this, becoming only firmly part of language in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it's already started to be dropped. Booksellers such as Waterstones lost theirs in 2012. Even the local Harrogate institution, Betty's Tea Rooms, Raw, do not use an apostrophe for Betty's anymore. There's a great quote in the article, which might be the most British thing ever, from an English teacher who's become an activist on the issue in your town, a man called Mr. Wood. Hello there, Mr. Wood. He says in the article, if you get rid of the apostrophe, what's next? Commas? Full stops? Do we just use emojis? Raw, are you familiar with this local issue? Are you in fact about to storm the local council with your dictionary, your thesaurus, your pitchfork?
Well, I am. You'll be unsurprised to learn a language purist. And there's a quote in the piece from a professor of linguistics, I think at Columbia University rather than the country. And he's like, yeah, it doesn't matter, who cares, it's just an apostrophe, whatever, big deal. And I was really genuinely offended. Like, if we don't stand for the apostrophes, what happens next? I found that a really staggering approach. I wasn't familiar with the story. I felt a bit guilty that I didn't do it, just Harrogate's 10 miles away. But I am familiar with St. Mary's
Why would
Walk.
the New York Times have you write the article when they can fly in somebody from like the Ohio Bureau?
Jet somebody in from Milwaukee, get them to do the Harrogate-based story. No, I just feel like as a journalist, you should probably spot that stuff. But no, it's apparently a big issue. Harrogate is probably best summed up as the sort of place that would get really worked up by an apostrophe. There's a very Harrogation kind of aspect to it. But I mean, in terms of apostrophes, I think we should stick with them. I can't believe that that we're allowing the computers to make these decisions for us. It's a lot like VAR. That's my assumption.
A bit like the Premier League in general, as we were about to discuss, Raw. But my God, first of all, I didn't read the Columbia Professor part. That's how you get ahead in academia today, dear listeners. If you're a young listener, just be like that professor. I studied this my whole life. Who cares about apostrophes?
I can imagine him like grading papers just with like a lol. Do you know what I mean? This one's a lol. This one's a ruffle.
By the way, I do love it. At the heart of this story, the thing I love is the reality is society is falling apart. Democracy is eroding everywhere. But I love where you live, Raw. Harrogate, your local council is just going deep on grammar. There's something very beautiful about that.
Yeah, it's fine until they get obsessed with inappropriate use of the colon. I think that's...
Yeah, I was going to say, wait till they find out about Oxford commas. It's going to tie them up legislatively for generations. God bless you to the Harrogate Town Council. I want to start with a quick toast, raising a third first Michelob Ultra of the day. Oh, best Mickey since Arteta. To Italian Serie B team, Como. Serie B team no more, because on Saturday they ended a 21-year wait to return to the top flight Serie A after a 1-1 draw with Cosenza. And Como, which is I think about 50 minutes outside of Milan, are fascinating to me. It's been powered by co-owners Thierry Henry and Cesc Fabregas, who's also the assistant coach in this town. I mean, when you think of Como, you think of really as movie backdrops, which is where James Bond goes to the casino and narrowly escapes death. I think Star Wars Attack of the Clones was also partially shot there, but it will now welcome into that jewel box of a stadium on the seafront. It will welcome your Juves, your Milans, and become, I think, a truly new bucket list must-attend football destination for all comers. It's backed by one of the richest ownership groups in all of Italian football, the Indonesian Jarum Group. I said Cesc is the assistant manager. He's really the manager in waiting. He's currently trying to clear his coaching badges. In his stead, at the moment, Ocean Roberts, who is the caretaker boss, became the first Welshman to secure promotion into the Italian top flight. They've got an American player, US international striker, Neo Giacchini. I bet a number of American players will sign there in the off-season. But one of the sights of the weekend for me, 29-year-old forward, Alessandro Gabriellini, who joined Como back when they were in Serie D, the fourth level. He was semi-pro, and when they became big time, he just sobbed unashamedly, beautifully on the bench. This is a gent who took an economics degree because he doubted he could ever make it as a professional footballer. He apparently delivered his thesis wearing a pair of Como shorts and has been rewarded for following his dreams because he and the rest of his squad are now Serie A players. Raw, it's an amazing story.
It's a wonderful story. I mean, obviously, it's a modern fairy tale in the sense that there's a massive foreign ownership group involved, but it's wonderful for the town. It's a great place to go. Como is beautiful, in one of the most beautiful bits of Europe, to be honest. They have money, and it'll be really interesting to see how much of a track they give it at Serie A, because they've got Fabregas involved, they've got Thierry Henry involved. That's the sort of pulling power that attracts players. So it may well be that this is just the start of Como's journey.
God, I would love to do what we've done for This Week in Wrexham, This Week in Como. I think it's going to be amazing, whatever happens, as they just rollick across Italy for at least one season, hopefully more. But to the Premier League, we have a lot to discuss at both ends of the table. Let's start with the early morning Saturday game, the Amnesty International special at Craven Cottage. Fulham 0, Manchester City 4. Fulham, a team. There's probably never been more Fulham fans in the entire planet than there was at kickoff for this one. But we knew they not only had nothing to play for, but they'd also lost 15 straight all competitions to Manchester City. Those numbers are staggering, as are City's current romp of a record, 32 games unbeaten before kickoff. Honestly, they're kind of like the footballing equivalent of that hydraulic press in the Apple commercial that just crushes every single traditionally creative thing, replacing it just with Erling Haaland and a new iPad. They were coming off the 5-1 destruction of Wolves last week. They knew that they are guaranteed to win their 4th straight title if they win out, and God bless Fulham. I think there's a lot of talk about how they'd flown kites as a team-building exercise in training running into this one, a sight which filled Arsenal fans with, I think, a true panic. I don't know, Raw, what do they want? They wanted to see Fulham players pounding frozen meat carcasses in the freezer room, or like punching buckets of rice or whatever.
Yeah, it had full-on pre-season vibes, the sight of that, of Fulham putting the video out. I mean, I'm not a team building expert, so it might be that unfurling a kite, trying to work out how to get the kite up in the air, getting annoyed when the kite doesn't fly. There probably are valuable like psychological lessons to learn from that, but it's a bit weird to put it out on social media because it does give the impression that you don't really care about this football match. And to be fair to Fulham, they probably didn't. They're safe, they're fine.
And your team had just ingested a ton of edibles before the kite flying. I think that's what they were most worried about. Honestly, even if they'd like released a video of them just like ripping phone books Jurgen Klinsmann style, I don't think it would have mattered, to be honest. Yes, there was a bit of misdirection in the opening 10 minutes of the game. Fulham kind of buzzed gamely into attack down both flanks, but City just chose their moment to seize control, almost like a big dog suddenly irritated by the little Cairn Terrier who'd been playfully snapping in their face for the last couple of minutes. They tossed them aside with a snarl, that snarl being a 19-pass move in which City players just touched the ball. Everyone apart from Ederson and Haaland ended with Gvardiol. Yes, Gvardiol, that lumbering soft hands for a big guy defender, cutting in from the left, exchanging passes with KDB, and then just pantsing Issa Diop with his guile on the way to rolling the ball artfully home. Gvardiol, who now at this point had 5 goals or assists in his last 5 games. Man looks like essentially Premier League Little Dicky, yes, but he was a gent who was signed for defensive solidity, has suddenly become a goal-scoring killer. And Raw, there's no greater symbol of City being City than that man late in this season, just a frictionless winning machine.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most Guardiola thing imaginable that the player who's really come up clutch for Man City in the title race is the central defender who's playing at left back and is suddenly deadly in front of goal. That is, it's hard to think of a better sentence to describe what Guardiola does, how he sees football, what he wants from his teams. I think Guardiola weirdly actually looked a little bit out of place in the first half of the season.
How we laughed, Raw. How we laughed.
We maybe didn't laugh, but we maybe raised an Ancelotti-style eyebrow and thought, maybe this wasn't the best move for him. Because obviously we'd seen at RB Leipzig and with Croatia and stuff that he was a high-quality defender. But the last 3-4 months, he has slotted in seamlessly. He is playing out of position technically, but he pretty quickly got the hang of being the centre-back who's also a full-back and is also a midfielder. And now he's added goal-scoring winger to his game. It seems slightly unfair.
Out of position. Out of his mind. That is how he's playing. Just like that, City went top of the league. Game entered kind of stasis. City maybe in 2nd or 3rd gear. This is a team who are unbeaten in 63 games in which they'd led at half-time. So there was like no suspense or intrigue, really. Fulham did have a slight chance through, I think it was Mooney wrestling with Akanji at the near post to force Ederson into a full-body sprawl of a save. But again, City just shook it off. Rolled downfield. Bernardo Silva progressed the ball. It squirmed to Phil Foden, and he finished in his true, regular, clinically ruthless way, as if he anticipated a ball he could never have possibly anticipated. Cue finger gun, jazz hands, oh death. It would soon be 3. Gvardiol again finishing. I mean, again, just the greatest symbol of City's omnipotence, and Kanji missed the ball by centimetres, but Gvardiol was sliding right behind him. If one gen doesn't get to you, the next will. Finished acutely. I think it was his 5th goal in his last 7 games. Again, if it's not one City player hurting you, it is utterly, ultimately, always another. Alvarez caressed a penalty at the death. tightening up the goal difference at the top. Q Poznan from the City fans, the most contempt-filled collective celebration in football. We are turning our backs on the game. It may still be going on, but we are declaring it's over. And you kind of, well, we're going to talk about this, Arsenal fans, you kind of have to say the same thing about the title too, Rob.
Yeah, it's a really strange situation. There was a great piece by Jonathan Lew in The Guardian over the weekend talking about whether this is actually kind of a simulacrum of a title race, that we've tried to talk one into being, but we all deep down know that we know the outcome, and the outcome has been really obvious. And I think what you mentioned there about City, there's various statistics that are quite telling about the way City dominate. They're not going to get like a historic points total this season or anything like that. They're going to get a fairly standard points total as they did last year. But there's this ominous feeling that they can't be stopped. And I think part of it is because quite often they score the first goal. So Gvardiol scoring 13 minutes in against Fulham felt fairly typical. That for those 13 minutes, I'd say all Arsenal fans, and to be honest, most neutrals would have been thinking, all right, maybe, Fulham might have spent all that time flying kites, but maybe they've learned something about aerodynamics that they didn't know before, and that is beneficial. And then the goal comes and you think, well, what's the point? And certainly here in Britain, the Old Firm game was on at the same time, Celtic Rangers, and that is crucial, or was crucial in the Scottish title race. And I suspect there'd be quite a lot of people who switched over as soon as City scored, that they'd have thought, actually, do you know what? The Old Firm's always a good atmosphere. It's always dramatic. Someone generally gets sent off. I'll go and watch that. But the other thing is that when City have a lead, they just don't give it up. And so they're 1-0 up. There's no point at which you really feel this is kind of in the balance. And I think that's really unusual. I don't even remember that with the great Manchester United teams under Sir Alex Ferguson, that there was always the chance that they might concede and then they'd have to go again. City just kind of score, control, score again, kill it off. And I think the title race has felt a little bit like that for the last month or two, probably even before Arsenal's defeat against Villa, which looks like it's going to be the crucial result. But the one thing I would say is that whatever happens now, because obviously City play Spurs on Tuesday night, whatever happens now, it does go to the final day. And I think that counts as a title race. You can't say you don't like the way the twists and turns have fallen. And it's maybe anticlimactic that the last twist and turn might have been, Arsenal against Villa in April. But ultimately, it has been a title race. There have been plenty of championships that have been much more of a procession than this. The problem is that everybody blinks except City.
Yeah, I mean, Pep said post-game, you mentioned the game on Tuesday against Tottenham Hotspur, the game in hand. Yes, Arsenal fans, Tottenham got you. He said the real final takes place on Tuesday. We know this, 2 wins in the next week will guarantee a Groundhog Day scene of title celebration for Manchester City. The illusion of a title race at least continues, which would be, we need to make this clear, an unprecedented 4th straight for Manchester City, a level that even the greatest teams in English history have never done. Huddersfield in the 1920s, 3. Arsenal in the 1930s, 3. The Liverpool I grew up with in the 1980s, and 2 Alex Ferguson recalibrations of his Manchester United teams. They could not achieve 4 back-to-back. It is uber historic, but it is, as you say, also starting to feel a little bit like a rigged game at a carnival, like that basketball hoop where they sharpen the 2 small rims and give the other teams a 2 bouncy ball to shoot with. All we know is Jack Grealish's Gucci bag. Better get ready for Ruben Dias to puke in it again. One quick City note that we do have to touch upon. Big piece of news at the end of last week, really quite remarkable to witness, remarkable in every sense of the word. 14-year-old American Cavan Sullivan has signed an unprecedented deal with the Philadelphia Union, which will land him at Manchester City, please God, I think in 4 years' time. He is 14 years of age. I don't know about you, Raw, but when I was 14, I was spending a lot of time at my neighbour's house mastering Frogger on his Atari. I was just in Philadelphia over the weekend. Everybody knew Cavan or claimed to know the parents of Cavan or played on the same team as him growing up. Had a kid who played on his team. It is a proud moment. It's a surreal moment. I say as an American. Remember, I've got to say this. The Freddie Adu rules, player development is neither guaranteed nor straight line. And 14 is so very, 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 very young. Watching him on video, he honestly sounds more mature than I am right now, to be honest. But Raw, what do you make of it? Is it even making the papers in England? Is this even on your radar?
Yeah, absolutely. There is. I think the fact that City have effectively signed a 14-year-old is significant global news. That people love wonder kids for a start, and people love transfers, and people love the idea of hearing about the next big thing at the first available opportunity. And this one ticks all of those boxes. I think there's a degree of intrigue that there is so much excitement over an American kid. The one thing that has been missing, and I don't want to be a party pooper, just as you say, for Philadelphia, for Sullivan's family, it's a huge, it should be a huge source of pride. And this is very much the way things work at the moment. I think it is outrageous that football teams can sign kids to contracts when they're 14. I think that is, when you actually break it down and think about it, it's ridiculous. And the City aren't the first to do this. Chelsea signed Kendry Páez when he was 15, I think, and he'll arrive at Stamford Bridge at some point in the future, the Ecuadorian. Obviously, Real Madrid had a deal in place with Endrick, certainly when he was 16, possibly when he was 15, for him to arrive at the Bernabeu when he turns 18. Does FIFA's statutes say you can only move abroad when you're 18? I don't know if there's a way around it. I don't know if there's anything you can do to change it. But it does feel to me like an awful lot of pressure to put on a kid at the age of 14 when you ultimately have no guarantee of how that talent will pan out. You have no idea. They are taking by their standards, relatively cheap gamble that he will turn into the next Messi, or even maybe not the next Messi, maybe not even the next Grealish. If he turns into the next Morgan Rogers, then City will make their money back. And that would be a huge achievement for Cavan Sullivan, obviously. But the fact that his future is now set out at the age of 14, he's under all that pressure, all that expectation, he will have access to all that money, doesn't strike me as being particularly great.
God, I would say, as someone that signed for Everton Football Club at the age of 7 in my dreams and is still waiting to play a game for the first team, I do wish Cavan the opportunity to one-up me. The other thing about Philadelphia events, this was a big birthday party. I just loved that even at this birthday party, the main course was Philadelphia cheesesteaks, which makes Philadelphia events just the greatest events. And Godspeed to all of you in that incredible city. But all eyes Sunday moved to Manchester. But that was because Arsenal were playing there at United. Suddenly second place Arsenal, who emerged job done, just winning 1-0 to reclaim first place in a game which began in the sun and ended with scenes of torrent and flood. And there was a bit of football in between. When you think about United Arsenal, you think historically, epically, the biggest game in the Premier League is what it was considered. Really a feud at its peak in the early 2000s. Tunnel bust-ups, pizzas thrown at one team by the other, boots kicked at star players in the locker room in anger. This one, though, really, as the gap between these two teams seemed bigger in Arsenal's favour. United, however you want to cut these numbers, they're brutal for this brand, which is based on, as a great global brand, on invincibility. I think 18 games lost all seasons, all comps, fresh off their latest self-soiling humiliation, the beatdown at Crystal Palace. On Monday night, the prospect of United helping City to the title here, honestly, it felt as distant as Frido Corleone helping his brother Michael. United were without Bruno Fernandes, Rashford also missing completely, both out injured. Incredible claim on Sky Comms, where they had Wayne Rooney in the studio. Rooney, live on British television, essentially accused Manchester United players, didn't say who, but he said certain players are faking injuries for this game to stay out of the limelight, which is a remarkable thing in every sense of the word. What did you make of it, Raw? Because if that was ever a symbol of how far United have decayed in a moment, it's probably that.
Yeah, and the fact that it came from Rooney is significant, as Rooney is young enough and famous enough to still have plenty of connections in that dressing room. He will certainly know people who know the players. He will, I imagine, know quite a few of the players himself. At the same time, it's unsubstantiated. It's just a claim. And you do tend to get a little bit of a leitmotif from former players, especially recently retired former players, who were quite judgmental about the physical pain that they went through compared to the physical pain that their successors are prepared to tolerate. So whether Rooney means that certain players are pretending to be injured, I'm not sure how you do that, given that they've got doctors and stuff. And I presume that the injury check is more sophisticated than just being prodded and you having to say ow, and if you say ow, then you don't play.
Yeah, in Rooney's day there were no doctors. We should make clear.
Or whether it's, and this is really common, whether he is basically saying that certain players, all players, most footballers are injured at all times. They all have little niggles, especially this stage of the season, little niggles, little aches, little pains that in some cases they shrug off and get through, and they'll take a painkiller and they'll crack on. In other cases, they tend to need to feel really good to be able to play, and they don't trust their bodies to hold up. And I don't think one approach is right and another one is wrong. It's just a personal thing. Whether he feels that one or two of the United players maybe had decided that their bodies weren't up to playing because they didn't really fancy playing against Arsenal, that feels like the sort of thing that might happen. I don't think like Bruno Fernandes is like putting on a limp. That's not.
That'd be amazing.
I don't think it's that kind of
like
deal.
One of my kids, like, Dad, I don't feel so well.
Well, it's like a long-term dive, isn't it? Effectively, you sort of Fernandes sort of hobbling,
Which
hobbling
we'd never
out of the
accuse
car.
Bruno. We would never
No.
never be the last person we'd accuse of that. I mean, Arsenal, all they knew was they had to win to keep that title race from slipping out of their hands. 40 wins in their last 16 games, conceding a miserly 0.78 goals a game in a process, which is truly, really the dominant factor in their season success. Still, Arsenal fans knew that their boys had only won just once in their last 16 Old Trafford Premier League clashes. We asked United fans if they wanted a win and help City to the title. One of the most lovely responses, and by lovely I mean dark as heck, at the FL man, Dan MUFC tweeted us and said, I don't care anymore. I am lifeless. I am going through the motions. I am only capable of bodily functions for survival, which was, I mean, God, welcome, my friend. That is Everton fans' default setting. But also began as if that was truth. Saka dominant. They always set up camp in and around the United area in the open exchanges. United crackled on the breakthrough through that footballer who looks just like Singer, Shaw, Mills, Old Hoyland. Arsenal's midfield, not at its best. The passing not sharp. Almost a tiredness, a heavy-leggedness evident. So it was helped on 20 minutes when they were gifted a goal by United error, compounding upon error. Trossard stabbing home ultimately from close range, always him. I think 3 of the wide-eyed Belgians' last 4 Premier League goals have put Arsenal 1-0 up. But this goal really was about defensive implosion across the back line. You can look at Onana. You can look at Evans for their roles in it. Havertz, God bless him, his 14th goal involvement of 2024, played onside by a dawdling Casemiro, who was essentially playing walking football in this first half. It was really astonishing to watch his performance. He's almost taking the piss. It's almost like, you may not be qualifying for Europe, but I'm clearly not going to be here. Let me show you how much I care. At Demon Hampson tweeted us to ask, is Casemiro too washed even for Saudi Arabia or MLS, as Jamie Carragher has suggested? He goes, Raw, when does Casemiro quiet quitting become loud quitting?
Well, the issue is that there's this massive noise around Ten Hag, so everything else kind of pales into comparison. And I mean, feeds into it to an extent. Casemiro, it's really hard to assume that. I think we have to assume now that these are not Casemiro's greatest efforts. And if they are, it's quite sad. The overall kind of picture around United is that the squad have lost faith in Ten Hag. They know they're not really playing for anything that they want to achieve. They're not in the Champions League. I suspect most of them don't care one way or the other whether they're in the Europa League or the Conference League or nothing. There'll be quite a few players there that know that they might not be around next season. There'll be even more who are pretty certain the manager won't be around. What always surprises me slightly is that strikes me as being quite a short-term view. That if the manager's going, should you not be playing to impress the new manager? Do you not want to? You're a Man United player. Do you not want to kind of make that make your case early? I think there's no question now that Casemiro, if they can find a buyer for him, and that will probably be in Saudi Arabia, that he will go. It was a strange deal when they signed him. There was a degree of like glamour attached to him because he just won the Champions League. He came as one of the most decorated players of all time. But it was fairly obvious that Real Madrid let players go when Real Madrid want players to go, and he looked, even in that Real team, a little bit like his powers were waning. Similar to Rafa Varane, I suppose, that they looked at Man United and thought, well, there's a club that likes stardust and doesn't really care about how young a player is or how many miles they've got in their legs. It does look, and this is easy to say with hindsight, it does look like a really, really bad transfer, to be perfectly honest. He was okay for points last season, and the only mitigating circumstance at the moment is that he's playing in central defence.
Yeah, we spoke midweek. I think you said that pound for pound, he may be one of the worst purchases in Premier League history. When you look at what he's contributing, and he really has become a symbol of this just late season human darkness at Old Trafford, which was suddenly silenced. And you mentioned poor Eric Ten Hag standing there. I feel for him in his Paul Smith new houndstooth brown sports coat, utterly bemused, utterly helpless. Even as Arsenal shut down their intensity after the goal, their ambition seemed to just dissipate. Maybe because it was the fourth straight identical starting lineup for Mikel Arteta, and you could almost smell the fatigue. But what was it that cramped them for the rest of the game? Was it the physical and mental just exhaustion at this stage of the season, or was it a realization that they'd only won once in 16 seasons at Old Trafford, and all that history weighing them down on their shoulders, the fear of failure at the last nagging away at them, the feeling that one slip could end it all, the anxiety? How did you understand it, Rob? Because from an Arsenal perspective, this was so much nervier, so much flatter, so much more cautious than it should have been.
Well, there's lots of different ways of looking at history, aren't there? A lot of people kind of put the focus on individuals. Some people see sort of systemic change, economic driving forces. I'm a big believer in the fact that history is defined by the weather. And I think basically what happened was it started raining a lot, and Arsenal worked out that A, they were very wet, and who likes running around in the wet? And B, it's a lot easier to fall over when you're wet, so maybe don't try and fall over. I think the rain in the last 20 minutes was definitely a factor. That definitely changed the game, the way the game was played, because that same rain arrived where I live about an hour and a half later, and it was properly torrential. And I think a lot of players get slightly more cautious in those conditions. But the two big things, one, like you say, there will have been for Arsenal's players, a lot of pressure on the fact that we kind of have what we want. We're 1-0 up. We don't need to take risks at this stage. There is absolutely no reason to go and try and kill the game off. If we just sit here and let the game end, then that is fine for us. All we have to do is take City to the final day. And we will ask the question, and Arsenal did that. And I think the reason that the game kind of shut down for so long, that it did enter that period of stalemate, and it really ended in a period of stalemate, to be honest. I know Garnacho had a couple of kind of moments, but there was no real sustained pressure, was because I think ultimately Manchester United were perfectly happy to lose 1-0. That for them, it was not a humiliation. It was, there were enough positives that you could maybe say, we've. I think Ten Hag said after the game, we've come close to drawing with one of the best teams in the Premier League, and that is
it's amazing.
That is they're actually going to carve that onto the stand outside Old Trafford.
That's amazing.
That is an achievement for the commercially most successful club in football.
That's amazing. When they're trying to work out how to make the Premier League more competitive, they should genuinely debate whether you should get points for, quote, coming close to drawing with one of the best teams in football. I
think moral points, definitely.
It's the future.
I think what you basically had was two teams who were quite happy with the result. And it looked in those certainly the last half an hour or so, it looked pretty much like there was no real benefit to anybody. Because if United suddenly open up to try and chase an equaliser that they don't need and makes no difference to their season, they could easily lose 3 or 4-0. And United have done that under both Ten Hag and under Solskjaer beforehand. And I think a lot of them have learnt their lessons, that if you're getting beaten by a team that is very obviously better than you, just take the narrow defeat. No one gets too cross.
This is amazing. By the way, it sounds like, I agree with you, the ambition of Manchester United was just the most staggering theme I took away from this game. And it does sound like the greatest Axl Rose solo album, Relieved Not to Be Being Destroyed, which was really the extent of Manchester United's intentions. Yes, Saliba was able to repel all comers, but you only really had Garnacho, who just seemed to be deliriously jabbing away at Ben White. Arsenal looked gassed. I mean, they did have their finest moment was when Erdegaard destroyed the entire Amrabat family for generations to come with the way he pirouetted away from Amrabat just left him sliding. Yeah, I mean, genuinely as if a hole had opened up in time and swallowed him whole. But yes, there was a lot of slipping. It was even before the rain, though. Raw rumours actually came out that the groundsman, had been instructed to flood, I crap you not, the areas in the box, anticipating that those were the very areas Arsenal would be spending most of their time in. But the game genuinely just drifted. And in that period, we talk a lot about Doom Men. On this show, we talk a lot about Arthur Miller plays, Death of a Salesman, Willy Loman. There's nothing more death of a salesman right now in football than Erik ten Hag, once the rain started, and it was a monsoon, through that hole in the roof at Old Trafford, almost a biblical downpour. Great tweet from @Chris G. Howard. At the height of roughly 55 metres, Old Trafford Falls stands as England's fourth tallest waterfall, behind only Cauldron Snout, Contegan Falls, and Cowtley Spout. I just love that a waterfall's called Cowtley Spout. You'd only have that in England. God bless. Even sadder sight, though, watching him in that damp beige spring linen suit, just looking on helplessly. Ten Hag soaked, drowning, flailing. And you saw in that moment the dank, dark reality of a very physically, emotionally shattered bloke. Like, by the way, so many of his predecessors, Louis van Gaal, just utterly befuddled, just distraught, completely confused by the intrigue at Old Trafford. His team have lost 14 times in the league. They've got a goal difference of -4. There was an article this weekend, I think, in which a United staffer talked about Jim Ratcliffe, the new era, the new controlling ownership. He said, different clowns, same circus. And Raw, Manchester United, they're almost certainly going to miss out on European football for the first time in over a decade unless they win the FA Cup. Erik ten Hag squirming, insisting, I have supporters backing, while the media foams about who will replace him, also who will want the job. You mentioned about so many former Manchester United players doing massive media on Sky and TNT. Roy Keane, Rio Ferdinand, Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, Michael Owen. That genuinely there's a thought that strong managers do not want to take the Manchester United job because there's so many outside voices that destabilise you from day one. Indeed, it may be the lack of serious options that even keep Ten Hag in a job, I think The Guardian wrote. Rory, how is this broken stasis going to be squared away?
Well, apparently Jim Ratcliffe's making them all work from the office, so it'll be fine.
That's it.
That's your solution. No more work from home. I don't know. It's a long and slow process, and as much as what Ratcliffe and Ineos have been trying to do does seem quite petty and kind of control freaky, and maybe trying to almost like a distraction technique. You've got this major sporting. The issue with Manchester United is on the pitch. Like the business itself has been run pretty well, basically. Fans don't like that, but that is pretty much true. It's what happens in the stadium and also to an extent to the stadium that is a problem. And it does seem as though Ratcliffe is obsessed with sort of tinkering around the edges with things to try and change the work culture. And, he's a tax exile. Why does he care about working from home? Jim Ratcliffe has built his wealth on working from home. And I find a lot of that, I can understand why people find that laughable. But I think there will be a lot of change at United this summer. I don't know if it will involve the manager. That does seem to be genuinely up in the air at the moment, unlikely as that seems. There will be a squad transformation. You'd like to think there would be a winnowing of certainly of the high earners, who I think have all proven themselves not really to be worth it. I think they need to find a vision for what the club is going to be. There needs to be an injection of young players, hungry players, for whom Manchester United is not a kind of option of last resort like Casemiro and Varane, but something to aspire to. Rasmus Højlund's trying to cut in that cloth, and I think that's a much more encouraging way to go for the future. But it'll take time, and that's where all the voices outside come in, because United now, like Liverpool in the 1990s and early 2000s, are the faded giant, and the consequences of that is that not only is there a lot of pressure from the fans, there's a real sense of discontent among the fans, but you have an awful lot of people working in the media who want to tell you how to do your job, who kind of want to have a say in how things work. And you have to keep them happy, you have to keep them on side. And it creates this incredible noise around everything you do. And that's not an especially constructive environment to work in.
God, if I were Ratcliffe, I'd actually just sign Gary Neville, get him back in the squad, Paul Scholes, all these guys, just to shut them the hell up. But the reality for Arsenal, this was not a good performance. They had to rely upon an individual error to get their goal, but they did have the joy of knowing that they, in this difficult moment, found a way to get their job done, whereas last season they wilted. 15 wins in 17 Premier League games now, 27 league wins for the season, most in club history, which Mikel Arteta was beaming about post-game. Arsenal go back to the top of the table. They are 1 point clear. City have the game in hand against Spurs on Tuesday. Arsenal, I think it's a 3-goal lead in goal difference. Title goes on to the last weekend. Yes, we know that. Manchester City very much have the advantage. Arsenal fans now have to become, this is extraordinary, massive Tottenham Hotspur fans, clinging on to this curious Pep Guardiola statistic that City have played 6 games in Spurs' new stadium, and their team have toured just once. They've lost all 4 Premier League tussles. Mikel Arteta praised his Arsenal players for, quote, opening the box of dreams, which sounds like an incredible Grateful Dead album, and said they must, quote, live the final day, which is, as Matthew McConaughey would say, much better than the other option. But Spurs, Rory, can you really imagine Spurs fans, Spurs players wanting to beat Manchester City and helping their dread rivals Arsenal to the title? Arsenal fan and Italian football connoisseur Nicky Bandini tweeted, absolutely refuse to believe, sadly, that Tottenham are going to win a game that could hand Arsenal the title. It reminds me of 2010 when Roma needed crosstown rivals Lazio to do them a favour against Inter Milan in that title race. Instead, they lost 2-0, and fans unfurled one of the all-time iconic banners, an ironic large, oh no!
The fans, I'm pretty sure, in that situation, will want Spurs not to win. And I think that's okay. I think that's natural that Spurs ultimately it's very unlikely that Spurs are going to be in the Champions League. They can't finish any lower than 5th, or they shouldn't finish any lower than 5th. So they're trying to play for nothing. And in that situation, you kind of think, well, actually, what you want here is, seeing as your team can't gain from this, you might as well damage a rival. So I'm pretty sure the fans en masse will be uncomfortable with it, but will think, do you know what, if we lose, that's not a terrible thing. And that's fortunate because Manchester City are a lot better than Tottenham. The team is actually slightly different. The team are playing very poorly. They obviously won at the weekend, but they're not in great form. That's why they're not going to be in the Champions League. Postecoglou will want to win. Obviously, he's a professional. The players are professionals. They will want to win, and they certainly won't be affected by the rivalry, because ultimately, I'm not sure how many of them are Spurs fans. I don't think they will be conscious of the irony of the situation they find themselves in, but I don't think Dejan Kulusevski or Richarlison grew up. We all know Richarlison was a boyhood Everton fan. You know, they didn't grow up kind of suffused by this idea that Spurs hate Arsenal, Arsenal hate Spurs. They will want to win as much as they could want to win a game that has very little impact on their season.
Come back to us, Richie. Oh, you proper scouser. By the way, we always say at these moments, Steve Coogan's quote, that you give the average English person the choice between their own success and your failure. They'll cheer for your failure every time. And I have to believe Spurs will channel that approach on Tuesday night. As John Oliver told me last time he came on, spite is the rocket fuel of human motivations. In lovelier news for Manchester United, their women's team made history at the weekend, won the Women's FA Cup for the first time in club history, 4-0 win over Spurs. Pick of the goals from Ella Toone, that enormous character and life force who opened the scoring with a stunning long-range banger. Find it, see it, just revel in that moment. Incredible scenes, an audience of 76,082 at Wembley. And raw, big picture, Manchester United and Chelsea, who are going for, at one time it felt improbable, but they have the Women's Super League title in their hands with Emma Hayes. 2 massive games for them this week. 2 American-owned teams whose men's team seasons largely have struggled, both being bailed out by the women's side of the club. It's been incredible to witness.
Yeah, and it was a real shame that Jim Ratcliffe chose not to go to the FA Cup final. He chose to go to, from a Man United point of view, basically quite meaningless men's game rather than one of the best days in the women's team's history. that we've seen in Barcelona, particularly in the last few years, that a really successful women's team can offset to a large extent the travails of the men's team. It doesn't, the fan bases aren't the perfect kind of circle. The Venn diagram doesn't always cross, but it's something that definitely works. If you're a football team with a men's and a women's division, and one of them is struggling, the other one doing well kind of helps. Not least as it provides proof of concept. It kind of says, we can do this properly. We can run an elite sports team with success. So maybe it's time for Man United men to look at the women and think, what are they doing well and how do we learn from it?
Best face of both clubs in a moment. Let's touch upon the moon tour of relegation. 2 teams relegated for shores now. And we pretty much have a very good idea of exactly who the third team will be. Let's start now with Tottenham 2. Farewells Burnley 1. By the way, from all the noise going into this game, it was almost impossible to tell who was the true struggling club. Burnley, who we knew were going to be relegated without a win, or Ange Postecoglou's Tottenham, reeling in the free fall of 4 straight league losses, Champions League qualification at Hail Mary status, that 1 point from 5 games in November and December, and now these 4 consecutive defeats for the first time in nearly 20 years had really been quite a kick to Ange's down belows. Q Spurs going behind, 25th minute, even Burnley dumping on Tottenham. Spurs, though, countered with wave after wave of attacks, came back through a Porro banger, and then a fine finish from Spurs Player of the Year. Van der Ven condemned Burnley to defeat and relegation. Spurs soldier on to face City on Tuesday. Such a dark mood amongst so many of the Spurs fans. Let's be honest, I do believe Tottenham Hotspur fans would have bitten your arm off if you offered them 5th place ahead of this first Harry Kane-less campaign. Here's the truth, though. Ange Ball has been found out. I think that's a prevailing concern amongst many of the Tottenham faithful. And I think Ange is going to have to show more signs of adapting than he has in the back half of this season. You could almost say the same about Burnley. They went down fighting, yes, with a late flurry of performances. Truth was, calibre of the player they had, the recruitment in the off-season where they did invest, but in a frenzied fashion. This squad wasn't good enough to play Vincent Kompany's buccaneering football at the elite level. I think the team took too long to learn their lessons. They had a dark habit they could never shape of leaking goals in bunches, remained so brittle at the back throughout. Our friend JJ Watt tweeted, "No need to hide. Disappointment or frustration, it should hurt. The boys made a valiant run of it the last few months, just wasn't enough in the end. We go again in the Championship, looking to relive these brilliant memories from 1 year ago. We go together up the Clarets." Rory, let's pour one out for Burnley. What do you make of this season and what have we learned?
I think what we've learned is you can't go too young. That is the lesson of Burnley. They spent heavily in the summer. They invested in a way that, say, Sheffield United didn't. They seem to have a plan. They seem to have a vision. They'd absolutely walked the Championship, and they looked like they believed that the way they were playing, that the way that Kompany wanted to play, would thrive in the Premier League, and that meant sticking with the kind of young, unproven, honeable talents that he'd been working with. And I think what we've learned is that if you come up, regardless of how you want to play football, you need a core of 3 to 6 at least Premier League players who are comfortable at that level, who know what they're doing, who can play the type of football that you want to play. You have to be, it's not that you have to spend a lot of money, but you have to spend what you spend really smartly to get players in who can dig you out of the holes that you will find yourself in your first season in the Premier League, even if, like Burnley, you've been there relatively recently. Burnley did get better. I think Kompany will have learnt an awful lot as a manager this year, and that will stand him in good stead. The club too probably have learnt a few lessons in terms of what they'll do next time, and I'm pretty sure Burnley will come straight back up. So it's not too much of a disaster. But yeah, you have to have a little bit more nous about you.
For JJ Watt's sake, I hope that is true. West Ham 3, Luton Town 1. Game at London Stadium, which began as the season began with false hope for Luton. Oh, Lakanga, a flying dagger of a header, gave the Hatters the lead. Cue chants of conference champions. You'll never sing that from the delirious Luton fans, but it was not to be. Goals from that son of a barrister, James Ward-Prowse, Thomas Soucek. And there's a capper, really sweet moment when 19-year-old academy graduate George Earthy scored with his first touch in his second game and ran off truly roaring. I watched that and I was like, in an all too often jaded world of football, elite football, it's just a reminder, a glimpse of how much it can mean to a young player. West Ham gave their departing manager, the great David Moyes, a winning farewell. I have made no secret I'm an enormous Moyes fan. The tenacious Scot, he waved goodbye in the sunshine to West Ham fans for the last time after 4.5 years. He will be gone at the end of the season. It looks like Lopetegui will be his replacement. Twice he'd swept into this club when it was in peril. Twice he'd saved them from relegation. Imbued the team with a spirit. Enough spirit to become European regulars. They tasted that magical Europa Conference night in Prague. Victory, club's first major trophy in 43 years. Yes, the football was not always scintillating, but the collective fight, the collective spirit rarely withered. I love the man. I love his commitment, his humility, his willingness to work as a fruit and veg delivery driver for those in need during the pandemic. He's a kind of old school football man, Raw, that doesn't get the respect he deserves in what's become an enormously hype-filled age. Managers have to deliver the clicks on TikTok. David Moyes don't give two craps about TikTok, but he is the best manager West Ham have had in the modern period by some distance, right?
Oh, by a mile. And if you look at his achievements at West Ham, he couldn't have done any more. You can quibble, and I think a lot of West Ham fans understandably have been unimpressed by the type of football. People who go to football stadiums pay an awful lot of money to watch football. People who pay to get the various streaming services you need to watch football pay a lot of money to watch football. You have a right to be entertained, and you have a right to feel as though what you're getting is value for money. And I don't think that's a bad thing. There's been a kind of camp of football commentary out over here who've kind of presented that as being a form of entitlement, and I don't think it is. I think if you're a consumer, which we all are of football, then you have a right to expect to be treated as a valued one, essentially. And Moyes does fall down on that. There have been times when he has been too negative. You cannot argue with the results. Top 7 finishes, European trophy, regulars in Europe. That is way above and beyond what he was expected to deliver. And the other thing is, and there's a double-edged sword here, but football is ever more obviously like an arm of the entertainment industry. As a manager, you kind of have to accept that you are the central figure, and what people want from their managers isn't necessarily winning. Fans of pretty much every club are resigned to the fact that they will not win the majority of their games during the season. West Ham certainly won't. I think West Ham have won 14 or 15 Premier League games this season. That's less than half. So it makes it really hard to say, well, I get results. Because you don't get results. Because 23 times a season, you're getting beaten or you're drawing. So don't hinge it on results.
And then we need the gags. You've got to turn around to the camera. This is the moment we fell in love with Klopp when he said, boom, that was it. Give us the one-liners. Go and work on your material. Get some improv lessons, David, and then come back to us.
You give fans something else to cheer on, whether that's...
Tracksuits.
A new tracksuit.
That's the future.
Or whether it's young kids. You give young players a chance and fans will go with you, but you need to take the fans with you. I think Moyes' failing at West Ham was very much saying, this is what you get and you should appreciate it.
Oh, Saturdays are and will always be for the Moyes. The Hatters, however, are now hanging by the thinnest of threads. Delusion, really. They are 3 points behind Nottingham Forest with a -12 goal difference. They would need 2 massive swings on the final day. They play Fulham, Forest play Burnley. Let's just eulogise Luton now, shall we? Because despite their doom, they've been one of the undoubted joys of the season. Their fans, their story, their journey, their football, always audacious, their fight, their Kenny, their stadium, their tiny jewel box, which West Ham fans leaving chanting, we could see you, we could see you, we could see you in your bath, to the local homeowners whose houses are built into the side of the stadium. delirious, wonderful. That is what football joy is full-throatedly about. Their fans have not taken a second for granted. Ultimately, Rob Edwards' men, I think one win in their last 16 league matches did them in. But they have been phenomenal to witness. The spirit, the energy, the optimism. But Raw, with Manchester City probably, spoiler alert, going to win their 4th straight title, and the 3 newly promoted teams, almost by just a shocking quirk of fate, going to be the 3 relegated teams for the first time since, I think, 1998. What does that really tell you about the competitive reality right now of the best league in the world?
Well, and also the fact that 2 of the promoted teams, at least, will be, in fact, 2 of the promoted teams will be the teams that came down last season. That's not great either. It tells you that the top of the league, first of all, it tells you that the league is harder than ever to get into and stay into because the standard overall is so high. Nottingham Forest are the 4th worst team in the Premier League, and they've spent about 300 million quid on players in the last 2 years. So that's the standard. It's really tough to get into it and stay into it. I think that we've seen a calcification, which is a very fancy word, of kind of where everybody sits. That is a big issue now. There is a kind of, it's not so much competitive imbalance, but it's competitive stasis. City are on the top. There are 3 or 4 teams that rise up and down to challenge them. There's a big chunk in mid-table, and then there's the 3 that come up, and maybe 1 or 2 others who are fighting relegation, and that's not ideal. That's not how the pyramid's meant to work, to be perfectly honest. And I think for the Premier League, that's not great. But yeah, huge credit to Luton. And the one thing with Luton that we should remember, they have very much technically, taken it to the final day. And that is, given their budget, really impressive.
That is almost the season-long equivalent of Eric Ten Hag's. We came very close to drawing one of the best teams in football. Just remember that quote, listeners, and laugh at me when I say that at least 4 times after Everton losses next season. You've mentioned it. Luton's loss means Forest are almost certainly safe, despite the scoreline of the weekend. Nottingham Forest 2, Chelsea Football Club 3. Forest stung by the rejection of their appeal against the 4-point deduction. Welcome form team Chelsea. Yes, I just said those words. Form team Chelsea. Loser have just won in their last 12 games. Todd Boehly's, who laugh last, laugh longest. And this one, Poch's boys played a number of the songs from their new material. Cole Palmer assisting Mudryk, who mishit it and scored. 2 goals in 119 second half seconds killed off the game. Another one for Nico Jackson to cap it, swooping in. Nico Jackson, 17 goals and 5 assists on the season now for the meme lord. He was not good at football, you can make the case, until he went bald, and then he's simply become unstoppable. Sometimes the best tactics are just a good haircut. Forest ended the day losers, but almost safe in the knowledge that 3 points clear of Luton and goal difference of plus 12 means they're not safe, but they're safe. God bless. We do need to discuss Chelsea quickly, but quietly, Raw, under the radar, the noise of their first half of their season and ineptitude. They continue to build, to grow. 3 Premier League wins in a row, up to 7th. We know there's a lag, a dislocation between narrative, especially the Lols narrative, and outcome. The journey of disaster has developed green shoots. It has. Chelsea's form suddenly so good, but it's been undercut by the manager's mood. Pochettino just giving, yes, winning, but complete uncertainty in his post-game press conferences, almost because his winning has given him leverage, and he's used it to almost goad the ownership into firing him, declaring publicly and often that if the club don't like him, or aren't pleased with him, or maybe he's not pleased with the club, he should be fired, or he should leave. There's been a whisper of other clubs' interest. David Ornstein talking about Manchester United rumours for Pochettino, all while Todd Boehly, speaking in LA last week, talked about, went out of his way to praise, quote, beautiful football being played by the team. Raw, is he almost hoping to get out alive with his reputation still intact?
That's not how I read it. To me, I think what you mentioned about leverage is really significant. It strikes me that Pochettino, over the last 4 or 5 months, with 2 or 3 very obvious blips, getting beaten heavily by Liverpool and Arsenal in particular, the second half of the season's been pretty positive for Chelsea. They've crafted a side. They've started to get results. I think their form since the turn of the year is up there with everyone except basically for City and Arsenal. There are very obvious green shoots coming through, And I suspect that Pochettino wants to have a little bit more of a say in the direction of travel this summer than he thinks he might get. Because he will be able to see in the squad, this is what I need, this is where we have to strengthen, these are the problems, this is the thing that we can leave alone as this is working perfectly. And I think he might be worried that not so much the ownership, but the number of people they've got who've got very senior recruitment titles might mean there is more churn than he wants there to be this summer. There will be players who leave and there will be players who arrive, but I suspect Poch wants it to be relatively quiet this summer. And it may well be that he is kind of posturing now that he's got the form behind him to say, look, they could finish fifth. Chelsea could genuinely finish fifth this season. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. Pochettino's got a bit of power. It's the strongest position he's been in as a manager for a long time. And I think he's trying to use it to make sure the summer is what he wants it to be.
Janet Jackson, Control. Talking about the European title race, Newcastle's European hopes dented by Brighton in a 1-1 draw during a glorious sunny day at St James's Park. Crystal Palace surging end to the season under Oliver Glasner. Their last 6 games have featured wins over Liverpool, West Ham, Newcastle, Manchester United, and now 3-1 at Wolves, this is how football goes. Has immediately led to all kinds of rumours linking, yes, every club to their dynamic duo, Eberici Eze and Michael Olise, but even Bayern Munich now linked to new manager Glasner himself. When I read those news stories, I'm like, it's so hard to build when you're in the middle of football's food chain. Then, in the Battle of the Battling Bees, Bournemouth and Brentford traded 3 goals from the 86th minute onwards. Johan Wieser finally firing a 95th minute winner for Brentford. Beautiful scenes. My moment of the week, running to his manager, Thomas Frank, whose father had passed away the previous day. Whole squad mobbed. Just a joyful wonder, Thomas Frank, in a really moving show of love and support and respect. They dedicated victory to their boss. Football, when it's something more than football, about connection and relationships and feeling and humanity, that is when it's at its best. One more game this match day, this afternoon. The Jurgen Klopp farewell tour rattles into Aston Villa, where Unai Emery will hope to soothe the stinging disappointment of being bounced from the semi-finals of the Europa Conference League by Olympiacos by qualifying for the Champions League, which would be a remarkable achievement for this Aston Villa team. Remarkable achievement for Unai Emery. Godspeed to all. But the big news coming out of Liverpool Raw, Arne Slot, the Liverpool manager-elect, is set to replace Jurgen Klopp in his living room, as well as in the Liverpool dugout. Removal vans have been seen at Klopp's $5 million 7-bedroom property. This is the Daily Mail writing, in the lovely beach town of Formby. It is lovely. I don't know, this is what we need to know about football now. 3 lounges, a home cinema, an indoor swimming pool, and a landscape garden. Just trying to bury in a little bit of outrage into this article. It's owned by Liverpool FC. Klopp moved into it. If you remember, Brendan Rodgers was his landlord, his predecessor to begin with. This property is almost like a biblical property that is begat and begat, passes down from one generation to another. No word if my favourite Liverpool manager, Roy Hodgson, once lived in it. There's too many lounges, Roy would say. But do you think it still has? Old fans will remember the show being Liverpool, in which Brendan Rodgers, I'm not saying he was an egotist, but he was one of the single people in the world most eternally fascinated by Brendan Rodgers. And he had an enormous oil painting of Brendan Rodgers over his own fireplace, which, well, they do tell Celebrity 101 is never to allow a journalist or a camera team to actually come into your home, because that's the kind of crap that ends up haunting you. I guess I'm asking, Raw, do you think Arne Slot will have to wake up every morning, pad around his family room in his underpants and eat breakfast, probably his stroopwafels or whatever he eats, and do it under the gaze of a Brendan Rodgers oil painting?
I would like to think so. I think that would be fitting if they left up. Like, every manager who lives in that house has to leave one. Like, they can change it as much as they like, but they'll leave one memento for the successor. So it would be the Rodgers oil painting, presumably like a guitar or like just a load of bottles from Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah,
just something
by the way,
to.
Maybe the home cinema will just be wrecked, just be like just cans everywhere, as if there's just been a frat party in it.
But then I don't know. Like, would Jurgen Klopp have I mean, in his early days at Liverpool, I can imagine him kind of turning up the heavy metal Jurgen Klopp and being like, right, we're painting this entire house black inside. We're going full dark. We're going gothic. Maybe it's got a bit sunnier as time's gone on, but he has definitely got. He will definitely have, I'm certain of it, like a home bar with one of those neon signs of like a woman, a serving woman pouring beer.
Yes.
I can't describe it. He will definitely have one of those. There's one in the office, the American office, the St. Pauli girl, I think.
Yeah.
That he has got that, possibly one in every room. I'm certain of it.
I bet you he just leaves a giant pair of his wooden teeth just as a nice little. But I do think Jurgen Klopp, it strikes me as being a dogs playing poker kind of guy. By the way, the real issue, and we don't have time to get into it today, but there are in Liverpool, in the city, about a dozen enormous murals of Jurgen Klopp. Every time I go home to see my mum, there's another bloody enormous mural of Jurgen Klopp. And it's got to be an enormous issue for Arne Slot. Can you imagine driving to training every day past the guy who is the man you are trying to replace? God, I just genuinely cannot believe the challenges ahead for that team. I'm about to tape with the mighty John Oliver today for our Farewell to Jurgen Klopp episode, in which we will no doubt go deep on all of the practical reality, but a lot of the emotional dimension of this remarkable journey, talking about dogs playing poker, the footballing version of dogs playing poker. Let's finish with Everton 1, Sheffield United 0. Another win, Raw. 14 points since the beginning of April going into this one. Let me say, only Arsenal, Manchester City have gleaned more, thanks to the Sean Dyche tracksuit era, for which Sean Dyche won manager of the month. Everton now playing with no jeopardy, comfortable enough to fold their own appeal against the second point deduction, leading to the anthemic chant of you can shove your points deduction up your arse from the Gladys Street over and over during this game. The goal, long ball from Pickford, brought down exquisitely by Dominic Calvert-Lewin with his gorgeous 8-pack, chested it down. Onana and Juki found beautiful Shite McNeil, who worked the way back to Dom, charged through that Sheffield backline, flicked a delicious cross for Doucouré to head home. 101st goal Sheffield have conceded this season, which is remarkable. I actually interviewed Big Dom at the end of last week. Comes out, I think, later this week. It's a beautiful, beautiful conversation with a phenomenal man. And the reality is, as sick as Everton's season has been, no support from the board, no money in the January transfer window, you could make the case, I actually believe this, that by dodging free fall and by letting the club's chaos not totally consume the locker room, Sean Dyche should be a manager of the season nominee. I mean that actually seriously. This is incredible. If Everton had been deducted 17 points, as recommended initially by the Premier League Commissioner, 12 for the first breach, 5 for the second, we still would have stayed up. We're like a footballing bloody cockroach. But this game honestly feels like a scene in the movie where the good guys have won a battle, but we know a looming war against evil. An invincible monster is about to loom ahead. And that's what it feels like. The 777 takeover is all but dead. No one knows what comes next. Who will step in to save this beautiful club I love? Which players will leave this summer? Will the money for Onana, Branthwaite, maybe Pickford actually just pay off the debt? Bankruptcy is an option. Raw. I was at Wrexham a couple of times this season. Before the games there at the Stoke Kairas, they sing a beautiful Welsh hymn, which I'm going to mispronounce awfully. Sorry, Tommy Cheese. Ima Ohid. It means still here. We are still here. We are still here. In spite of everyone and everything, we are still here. That's ultimately the leitmotif of Everton's season.
Yeah, and you're right. Dyche deserves credit. He won't win manager of the season. He's not nominated, but he should have been for what he's done. Equally, Rob Edwards should have been nominated. It seems odd that they seem to decide that the four teams at the top must have the 4 best managers. I find that very strange. Everton have done incredibly well this season, and the other thing that's important is they've taken their punishment, and that is kind of behind them now. They shouldn't have to worry too much. There might be, I suppose, a 3rd points deduction for whatever the set of accounts they've not done yet is, but they shouldn't have to worry about another major points deduction at any point. They look solid. They look together. I think that's really important. just as significant is the fact that 777 seem to now be off the table. That, I think, is a massive bullet dodged. And a lot of the credit for that should go to the journalists, particularly at Josimar, the Norwegian magazine, who've unearthed so much around 777 and actually created a lot of pressure for the Premier League to not wave that through. The question is now, can you find someone to take the club off Farhad Moshiri? That's the next step, and it may well be that there's a couple of local businessmen who've been linked with it. They would not. Then that is not a nation state. It's not the nation state of the Wirral. They don't have the Wirral access to the Wirral Sovereign Wealth Fund,
the Republic of Liverpool.
But it would at least put the club, hopefully, in sensible sort of ownership that would ensure its ongoing viability, and that may not be sexy and it may not be exciting, but given how close Everton have come to the brink, I think that's probably something the fans would appreciate for a while.
God, would we ever? And I do want to raise a final toast to that spirit, Raw. Also to Charlotte, the city of GFOPs. We are coming to your town this Friday. Come one, come all, come some of you. Raise a glass with us. Come and celebrate your remarkable city. Oh, the city that gave us Muggsy Bogues. We can't wait to be with you. Friday, May 17th, 7 p.m. Local time. It's at the Valhalla Pub, 317 South Church Street. Come and have a pint with me. God, I'll need one by the end of this week. Are you coming, Raw? It's the best Charlotte since Bronte.
The second best Bronte. I wish I could, but I've got two titles to track. I'll going to Old Trafford on Saturday to watch Man United versus Chelsea, see if Chelsea can win the WSL, and then if the title's alive, I'll be in London. Or if the title might go to Arsenal, I'll be in London, and if not, I'll be waving a tearful farewell to Jurgen Klopp at Anfield.
And also spending time writing apostrophes on street signs all over Harrogate. Those apostrophes are in Rory Smith's handwriting, local council. Just know that. We will speak to you, Raw, right after the final whistle on Sunday. I think we're going to go live on YouTube. Come and be with us. Raw, it's been incredible to be with you today. I've loved every single second. Thank you, you beautiful man.
It's been a pleasure. I'll see you soon.
Godspeed. America, remember, savour every second watching football. Let's not take a minute of watching together for granted. We got a slew of quite poetic content this week. Tuesday, Phil Parkinson. The greatest double P since Paul Pogba. Wrexham's manager, the normcore genius at the heart of that club, joins me to review a season that dreams are woven in and made of. On Wednesday, John Oliver will come and talk about the human wonder that Jurgen Klopp has brought to his, and I think just Liverpool nation's hearts, minds, lives for nearly 9 seasons. And on Friday, the man who shattered many of those hearts, Erling Haaland, will join me for a podcast. It's incredible to savour this season. Incredible. The women's side, Godspeed Emma Hayes. The men's side, we will pick it up on Sunday, live after the final whistle. This is Rog saying Kung Fu Fight in America. Big love and courage.